Despite being a key member of the government and the lone minister on the prairies, Randy Boissonnault has resigned from Justin Trudeau's cabinet. The announcement came after weeks of mounting controversy over his business dealings and his purported Indigenous identity. I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is 10-3. National Post politics reporter Chris Nardi joins me to discuss how Boissonnault became embroiled in the controversy, what led to his departure from cabinet, and what comes next for the Edmonton MP. Don't forget, you can find us on all your favorite listening platforms, even Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Don't forget, click follow, recommend it to your friends. So, Chris, Liberal Cabinet Minister Randy Boissonnault has found himself on the outs of cabinet. He's agreed to resign from cabinet, and it's kind of a convoluted story how he got here. But I guess for starters, I'm out in Edmonton where he represents a riding here. And so we're kind of familiar with him here. And you're out in Ottawa where he sits in Parliament. And so Ottawa circles are kind of familiar with him. But before we get into some of the controversy around Randy Boissonnault, kind of familiarize readers with this MP.
So Randy Boissonnault, he is an Alberta man who was adopted very early into his life. I don't think he really knows his biological parents, actually, and was a businessman for the better part of his career until about 10 years ago, when he decided to launch himself into the nomination for the Liberal Party's candidacy for the riding of Edmonton Centre. And so was first elected here to Parliament in 2015 when the Liberals defeated the Harper Conservatives and formed government. He sat as an MP and briefly as well as a parliamentary secretary for Heritage during that first mandate from 2015 to 2019. And in 2019 lost his seat for 2 years. So that was the second Trudeau government that was a minority government. And so from 2019 to 2021, he was not an MP. During that time, he actually co-founded a company with another gentleman called Stephen Anderson that it was a medical supplies company that they founded very early in the pandemic in 2020. And that'll be important because that'll come back and bite him. But in 2021, he ran again in the federal election, and this time he was reelected in Edmonton Centre. So he says that he basically left behind the operations of the company that he had founded with Anderson, which was called Global Health Imports. And he devoted himself completely to his political career, but remained a co-owner of GHI, Global Health Imports. And shortly after his election in 2021, he was appointed to cabinet because he was one of two Alberta MPs that the Liberals had elected, and basically the only one from the prairies outside of Manitoba. And in 2021, so he was elected. He was appointed minister to cabinet. His last role was Minister of Employment, as well as Minister responsible for Jasper since the wildfires, up until his resignation from cabinet on the 20th of November.
Right. And as you mentioned, during his time away from politics, kind of his time in the penalty box, I know the Edmonton Centre is a close riding. For those not familiar, it has gone back and forth between parties over the years and has had tight races. But so during his stint away from politics, he founded this business, and this business kind of came up not in a great way for Minister Boissonnault earlier this year, when there were questions around how the business was operating and how much involvement he had with the company, even though he said he wasn't involved with the company. What happened there?
So a lot of things have happened with Global Health Imports, and I suspect, he said so himself, but I suspect that he deeply regrets going into business with Stephen Anderson when it comes to Global Health Imports. So Global Health Imports was founded as basically a personal protective equipment distributor, a kind of a middleman of sorts at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so obviously, as we all probably remember, there was this huge rush. Everyone needed gloves, they needed masks, they wanted hand sanitizer. And so this company, for a money to contract, kind of specialized in trying to get gloves for its clients, who then would redistribute them or use them. They had clients in the United States for the most part. And so he founded this company with Anderson. And what's come to light since then is that Anderson, at the very least, really seemed to have built up kind of a fraudulent scheme. That's the words that one of the former clients of the company used in an affidavit recently, because he would promise these gloves to companies that wanted to buy them, swear that he had them, force them to pay him a deposit, and then many of them, not all, but many of them said they never once received a single box of the product that they ordered, but they also never got their deposit back. Anderson and GHI have faced more or less, I think it's 7 or 8 civil suits now. They are on the hook for paying millions of dollars in civil damages and different decisions in the United States. There are other cases in Alberta that are ongoing. And so about a year ago, within the last year, Global News, so Patty Suntag at Global News, began reporting these kind of very suspicious allegations and lawsuits against Global Health Imports, which at the time of the reports before the summer, Randy Boissonnault was still co-owner. He still owned his parts in the company, though he swears that he pulled himself out of the operations when he was elected and named a cabinet. Why did he pull out of the operations? Because under ethics laws, it is illegal for a cabinet minister to both manage a business and be in cabinet. So he says he pulled out, but he still owned a fair amount of shares in this company, this small company. So stories start coming out of how this company was, allegedly defrauding some of its clients. And as part of those lawsuits, text messages started emerging in which Stephen Anderson, the co-owner, was texting clients and telling them, I need to speak to Randy. I'm talking to Randy. I'm going to ask Randy about this deal. But the problem was at the time of these text messages, which was about 2022, Randy Boissonnault was in cabinet. So if he truly was speaking to Randy, that was illegal. It broke ethics law. He's not allowed as a member of cabinet to operate a business outside of government.
What did Randy Boissonnault say about all of this and all of these revelations that perhaps that his business partner was texting him about company operations? What was his explanation for all this?
It was deny. It wasn't me. And what was fascinating about this, Dave, is that Stephen Anderson's story about who this Randy was has changed tremendously over time. At first, he said, no, that wasn't Randy. It was another Randy in the company. And this sparked a meme of Randy and the other Randy that Parliament and especially the opposition party started digging into this. They started joking, who is the other Randy? He swore that it was another Randy in the company, but could never say who. Eventually, Anderson admitted he lied about that. It wasn't true. And now his version changed. Suddenly, it wasn't Randy anymore. It was an autocorrect that he made, a mistake. His phone changed the name, and it was another employee, I forget the name, allegedly, that he meant to refer to as Randy throughout the text messages. But then, as the civil lawsuits went through and the parliamentary committees started taking on this investigation, more text messages to different people during the same period started kind of coming to light where he kept mentioning this Randy. So either his phone is a compulsive autocorrector that hates the word, hates another name and loves Randy, or that was also a lie, which is the presumption at this point. So now the theory is that either he was talking to Randy, and things in the text messages that he was saying about, I have to ask Randy, he's in Vancouver now, was a text message that he sent to someone. And at that time, Randy Boissonnault, who was in cabinet, was at a cabinet retreat in BC, in Vancouver. So some of the details actually match up. Now, what's unclear is, was he actually speaking to Randy or not? Randy Boissonnault says, I've never communicated with him. I've not talked to him. Basically at all since I was appointed to cabinet. I had nothing to do. He's lying. And Stephen Anderson has gone quiet. Truly, he's gone quiet, and he's been solicited. He is dealing with his own problems with Parliament because he's now accused of breaking parliamentary privilege. He's not responding to questions from Parliament. But this is kind of the state of affairs now. Was Randy that Stephen Anderson swore he was talking to when Boissonnault was in cabinet? Is it actually Boissonnault, or did he make all that up to make the company sound more legitimate?
Are we going to get answers on those questions, do you think?
At this point, woof. Honestly, probably. It will have to come to light eventually in, I'm assuming, some of the civil lawsuits. There's one, for example, in an Alberta court right now, where eventually Anderson will be, he's under oath and maybe in a deposition or something, this question will be put to him. And maybe eventually he will actually state clearly. But as of now, we kind of have two diverging views. One of a man that keeps texting about a Randy, and another that says it wasn't him. And I will say that to the clients, the scorned clients that I've spoken to, not one of them has actually ever directly spoken to Randy Boissonnault during their dealings with the company. So they are hearing about this Randy in text messages, but they've never seen nor spoken to him during those years.
We'll be right back. As part of this resignation, a lot of the coverage has been about Randy Boissonnault's Indigenous identity, or how he identified himself. How did we go from this controversy about whether he was communicating with his former business partner or his business co-owner to concerns about how he was representing himself?
So this is a very interesting story, and this is kind of where the National Post Ottawa Bureau comes in. So about early November, Patty Suntag, who was at Global, I mentioned her, so she doesn't work there anymore, and she freelanced a piece for the National Post where she revealed that during the years when Boissonnault still worked actively with GHI, so before he returned in politics in 2020, his company, GHI, applied for 2 federal contracts, procurement contracts for PPE equipment, PPE. And as part of those 2 applications, which he says were submitted by Anderson, the company identified itself as wholly Indigenous owned or Aboriginal owned. And that's important because for a number of things. There are federal programs in the government that do offer priority to Indigenous-owned businesses when they're applying for contracts. Now, it's important to say that these 2 companies were not finally granted. They did not win these bids, nor were they ever put on the government's Indigenous company registry. But the important part is that the company applied as wholly Indigenous-owned when Randy Boissonnault has made kind of various claims about potential Indigenous heritage over the years. From 2015 to 2019, when he was first elected, he often said in the House that he was adopted Cree or non-status adopted Cree, referring to the fact that he was adopted by a family that has non-status Cree lineage. And he said many times in the House, public events, that it came from a great-grandmother, an adopted great-grandmother who was, quote, full-blooded Cree. At the same time, from 2016 to 2019, he was part of the Liberal Indigenous Caucus, which the party identified as a caucus formed of Métis, First Nation, and Inuit MPs. There was a number of these indications that, if not clearly stated, at least implied strongly that he was Indigenous or had Indigenous lineage, right? But then when he left politics, he stopped referring to that, and even in an interview referred to himself as white. And so while his company is applying for contracts claiming to be wholly Indigenous, he never really made that claim. And so Patty Suntag publishes this story, and following that story, the day after, Randy Boissonnault puts out a statement on social media which says, I had nothing to do with this. This was all Anderson. I had no idea. I am not Indigenous, nor have I ever claimed to be. And in fact, he doesn't kind of acknowledge but the fact that he'd spoken about being non-status adopted Cree for years. But in this new statement, he says, my adopted mother and brother, in fact, recently became citizens of the Métis Nation of Alberta. So now suddenly his adopted family is Métis in 2023. And so the question that kind of goes on in our little newsroom, Patty and myself and another colleague, Stephanie Taylor, is what the heck? Mm-hmm. Where does this Métis lineage come from? We've heard for years about how he was non-status adopted Cree. This great-grandmother was full-blooded Cree. And then suddenly now he's Métis. What's going on? And that's what sparked this snowball of 2 weeks of stories where we just kind of wanted to dig into his lineage. We asked his office, and to their credit, like we gave them a flood of questions, let me tell you, over the weeks, and they really did try to answer them as well as they could. But they were basically discovering his lineage while we were feeding them information that we were finding about his adopted family's heritage census data. Stephanie Taylor, my colleague, did incredible work where she found online census forms that had his great-grandmother on there that clearly identified that she likely wasn't full-blooded Cree because her dad had declared to be an American of German parents, for example. So we're sending this information to Boissonnault's office saying, please explain. And it just became this kind of wheel where as we sent information, they would respond saying, oh, well, our understanding has now changed. And Randy Boissonnault always spoke of his heritage as the best, according to his best knowledge at the time. But what was kind of staggering to us is that he was discovering this because we were sending it to him. But this was a man who said for 10 years he'd been searching his Indigenous history. And in basically one day of research, Stephanie Taylor discovered it all.
Yeah.
And so that's what led to today, or the current situation.
So at what point did he come out and say, okay, I've obviously erred here, or I've misrepresented myself, I've done so unintentionally, I didn't know? Like, what was his explanation at the end of everything before he even left cabinet? He gave a bit of a mea culpa.
He did. So after about a week of reporting on our end, just kind of raising questions about what he said in the past about his ties to Indigenous heritage, and in some cases, completely contradicting things that he was saying to us. I'll give you an example. He talked about this great grandmother I was mentioning, Lucy Bernice is her name. And in a statement they sent us somewhere in the middle of this whole saga, they say, well, we'd asked questions about her, and they basically sent us a official statement saying, Lucy Bernice is his great grandmother. He knew her until she passed in 1975, which was surprising to us because Stephanie Taylor had found an obituary online in the Edmonton Journal that said Lucy Bernice passed away in 1987. It was her obituary. And a lot of the details about her family, who she was leaving behind, who was predeceased her, matched with information that Mr. Boissonnault had given in the House of Commons. So we sent back this obituary saying, are you sure that this great-grandmother that he claims to have known passed away in 1975? Because we have this obituary that says this woman who matches all that information died in 1987. And they came back and said, whoops. And so basically it was more or less after a week of similar stories internally that are kind of happening in the background as we're reporting that we don't report all completely, that he came out, did a press event in Edmonton, and when he was pressed by reporters, including intrepid Edmonton Journal reporters, he basically made a mea culpa that said, I apologize, I didn't fully understand my lineage. I'm discovering it in real time. And when he said that, what he didn't say was he was discovering it in real time as we sent him that information. And he apologized for not being clear enough about his identity and his heritage. And so that was kind of the first time after just over a week, I'd say, of slow drip of stories on him, that he admitted that he had made mistakes and he'd spoken openly about a heritage that he didn't know or wasn't fully cognizant of and wasn't fully educated about. And it was only about 5 days after he apologized that he was then booted or resigned from cabinet. And
yeah, so we get to that this week where it's announced that he's resigning, or he's leaving cabinet, or he and the prime minister have agreed it's time for him to go. We can parse that as best as we want. But what did the PMO have to say about his departure?
Basically 2 sentences. The gist of it was the statement came out. It was ironic because I was flying back from Calgary. I was blissfully unaware of all this happening on it was November 20th. I was in the middle of the air, and so right before question period, which is starts about 2:15 Eastern Standard Time, the Prime Minister's office puts out a statement to reporters that say Randy Boissonnault and the Prime Minister have spoken, and they've agreed mutually that Randy Boissonnault will be leaving cabinet, and another minister, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, will be taking on his responsibilities at official languages and employment. And that was it. That was basically it. That was the entirety, and that's most of what the Prime Minister's office really offered as a reaction to the whole saga. I really didn't get the sense that they wanted to get involved in it, quite frankly. There was some movement on kind of, we'll call it liberal social media circles, some attempts to discredit some of the reporting. I can't really get into it because I don't fully understand what the attempt was, but they were basically, a lot of liberal linked accounts, whether they were actually sent by the party or not, I really don't know, and I suspect not. But these, accounts were trying to push this narrative that there had been this correction in a 2019 CBC piece on the elections that said that, stated that previously they had mentioned that Randy Boissonnault was an Indigenous MP, but the Liberal Party then sent them a statement correcting a Liberal Party error, and then this time clarifying in 2019 that he was not Indigenous and did not claim to be so. But that was a surprise because he talked about being of Cree lineage, non-status adopted Cree lineage for so long that was kind of the first time that he denied it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, otherwise the PMO was mostly mum, quite frankly. We dealt internally with the minister's office until he resigned, and you could definitely tell that the PMO, the vibe that we got was that it was a very, very hot issue for them, and they wanted to tie the prime minister to that the least possible, because this was obviously a prime minister who in 2015 was elected on the basis of big promises about reconciliation.
So now that Boissonnault is out of cabinet, does this kind of end the saga, or could he face potential repercussions because of the issues around his business, less so the issues around his identity?
Yeah, the business story isn't going away anytime soon. It's definitely targeting Stephen Anderson, his former business partner, much more directly than him. He's not named in any of the lawsuits as far as I know. And it hasn't been yet, at the very least. But that is going to be an issue that tails him, because he decided to go into business with this guy, and he has since admitted in statements that it was a terrible mistake to go into business. It was an error of judgment, in fact, to go into business with Mr. Anderson. But those lawsuits aren't going away anytime soon, and there will presumably in those court cases be a need for him to clearly state if he was the Randy, and basically get to the bottom of the truth of who is this Randy in the text messages. Is it fake interactions that Stephen Anderson made up to pressure people by kind of implying that a Canadian minister is part of the business and he's talking to a Canadian minister and trying to get this deal done? Or was Randy actually quite literally involved in the business and breaking ethics law? That's something that will have to be sorted out. I will say that the ethics commissioner did investigate this at least twice, I believe, and in both cases opened and closed the investigation when he says that he looked at phone logs and messaging logs that Mr. Boissonnault provided to him, and he saw no indication that Boissonnault had in fact been involved in the dealings of the company. So twice now the ethics commissioner has said that did not occur, but I do think that this is going to be a protracted process in the legal system for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know it's something that definitely caught a lot of Canadians by surprise, except those who are watching politics, and I guess we'll see how these court cases eventually play out. Chris, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest, Chris Nardi. More from him, more political coverage in general at nationalpost.com. I'm Dave Breakenridge. Thanks for listening.